Social engineering is the use of psychology to manipulate other people to get what you want. In the context of what we're sharing today, this is not about using social engineering to get what you want, but more understanding how it works so that you can improve the physical security of your environment, reduce the problems with cybersecurity events, and also understand that when you are being manipulated. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. So there's this big conversation about how a man opening a door for a woman is offensive or some people don't like it. And my response to that is that opening a door for someone is a golden opportunity to show who you are and to discover a little bit about the other person. Your simple gesture of kindness, whether it's opening a door for a guy or a girl or a man or a woman or a young person or an older person, isn't about your isn't about opening the door. It's about social interactions. And the right kinds of social interactions are about understanding information. So let's go from the open controversy of whether or not you should open doors to people to understand that opening doors both figuratively and physically, can be a way for someone to discover information about your business. Now, we don't want them to stop opening doors. We want to make sure that there's the right camera coverage of your door and entryways, both external and internal. But here's how it works. So you're walking up to a door and you notice someone behind you. You take a little bit of time to slow down to allow the opportunity to open the door for the person. You're doing this as a courteous gesture. You open the door for the individual, they walk through the door, and while you're holding the door, you have the opportunity to observe their name on their badge, to make eye contact, to set up reciprocity, meaning I've done you a favor, perhaps you could do me a favor in the future, to identify their response. So if you open the door for them and they scowl and they're upset about you opening the door because of your patriarchal whatever, you understand now the type of person that you're interacting with. So in the case of social engineering, we used to do this in sales all the time. I would actually cold call or canvas a large office building. Now, large office buildings often have a front desk or they have some kind of entry security, and often you don't know where to go when you're cold calling or canvassing. So you start from the top floor, work your way to the bottom. So what we would do is we would wait by the front door, very often talking to the folks that are smoking outside the door, which again shows anybody walking up to the door that you have a familiar interaction, that you belong in this location, and then we would grab the door for whoever's there. The problem is many of these doors had key cards. So we'd reach over, grab the door, and it would not open, but we'd put our hand over the key card with like what looks like a key card because obviously you can see other people wearing key cards. We put the similar. So we put our hand over it. Now remember, I'm like 20 something years old doing outside sales, selling for Yellow Book advertising. I'd put my hand over the door and pull the handle and it wouldn't open. And I'd look at the card stupid. And then I look at the person walking up and they would swipe their badge and I would open the door for them and say, thank you very much. And they would go through the door and I would follow them. Now, again, I'm not telling you this to brag about me gaining access to buildings to then canvas the floors and sell advertising. I'm sharing this with you because this is easily prevented. So, when I worked in classified environments or for government contracting environments, we would know this is an issue. And if someone would do something like this, we would say, as we approach the door, noticing the other person's badge didn't work, we would say, would you like me to call security for you? We would go to the door and we would swipe our own badge and let ourselves in. And then from the inside of the door, shrug our shoulders and let the person at the front desk know. So what I've shared with you is that there are established ways to gain access to physically secure environments. When working for a Fortune 100 company, I had a legitimate badge failure, and I simply what this is called tailgating, allowed someone else to go through the door, hold the door for them. You do this during a busy time, and then I immediately walked up to the front desk and let them know what happened to my badge. But again, if it can happen legitimately, it can also happen illegitimately. And once somebody has access to your building, there needs to be another layer of security. So now what's important, and I mentioned it earlier, is that if you have cameras of those approaching the building and you have a camera of those entering the building, you can very often see when this happens, and then you can address those elements accordingly. Because a lot of folks, when I talk about social engineering or when we're having an in-depth section about physical security or cybersecurity, a lot of people say, well, we don't want to spend a lot of money to plan for the what if, what is most likely. I'm telling you right now that if you're in a mixed tenancy office building and you're the manager of that building, that there are salespeople every day using this to get into your building. And then once they're in the building, they will visit one office, get the names of the people in that office, and then when they go to the next office, they will mention that, hey, Mr. Jones next door, I was just visiting Mr. Jones next door, and I'm on my way back down, and I'm now introducing myself to you because we have this opportunity. This still happens today, except it is also happening on sides that are a little bit more nefarious. So I was selling advertising back in the 90s. I was doing computer consulting, and I was actually would be working legitimately on one client's computer system, and then visit their neighbors on either side to offer computer repairs. Uh, I've seen this done hundreds of times. Now, I've also been in secured spaces where somebody's shown up that's not supposed to be there. And so here's the second factor. Your doorman knows who comes and goes. So your front desk people, whoever's at the door, you always want to be courteous to those people because they can identify whether someone's in the building or someone's not. But they can also tell you whether somebody had entered the building who was not familiar. And this is very important. So you see something on the camera that looks strange, you talk to your doorman or your person at your front desk, you make the connection. However, if that person on the front desk is not paying attention to the overall concept that people may want to illegally enter the facility, or they may want to gain access for whatever purposes, then that person will not be a useful uh, tool in your physical security. So, what do we do there? So, whoever's at the front desk needs to require every visitor to sign in. Now, not just flash a badge and walk through, but actually come up through a controlled path. So, they come through the door, come straight to the desk, sign in, or do an additional badge swipe. And now you might be saying, well, this seems inconvenient. But again, why do people gain access to buildings? Why do they use these social engineering techniques? In the case of a salesperson, especially in a multi-tenancy building, that means there's different companies in the building. They're going to come in and they're going to try to sell something, or at least determine who is the decision maker, or come into the building and pretend they're coming for an appointment and find out who they should be meeting with, and then they're going to call back later to make the sale. That's not necessarily a bad thing if they have a quality product. But again, if uh, they're not supposed to be in the building, they become a liability for your organization. They create additional risk. Now, on the cybersecurity side, on the theft side, there is a real challenge, and it does happen. I was working for an IBM Global Services contract in Raleigh, North Carolina, and this has been in the news, so I'm not sharing anything out of order. And someone gained access to an IBM data center and removed several very large Cisco switches. So these switches are worth about $1 million each. They showed up in a Verizon looking truck. So again, they showed up looking like they belong there. They gain access to the building by this tailgating, which I just mentioned. And then they open the gates. And between the time they took in their service equipment, which was hydraulic lifts that they're like small carts that have this hydraulic lift on them, they took in fake equipment, toolboxes, wires, and cables, went straight to the equipment that they wanted to take, unscrewed the equipment, disconnect the equipment, and put it on a cart and had it out of the building. Now, I was on the response team for DNS, and we noticed that this network was going down. Everything was going crazy. Things were going down. Another team pulled up the security footage and they said, "Oh, there's a Verizon guy down there. Looks like he's doing some technical work. It must be another issue." So we thought the power supplies failed, and it has multiple power supplies. We thought the power supplies failed in this particular device. So while we're sending people down to reroute physically some of the elements, we realize that the Verizon person is extracting equipment. So we're having DNS failures. That keeps people busy. We're having complete network failures. That keeps people busy. We have the team dispatch for a manual failover because these multiple layers of prevention have gone out, and the Verizon truck drives away. Listen carefully. They loaded $2 million worth of equipment, these are switches, into a truck and drove away. Now, the conversation was that somebody just stole equipment, and it was the person, the external activity that stole the equipment. How did they get in? They tailgated a door. How did they open the outside gates? They asked somebody to open the gates. Really, you should have, if you have a building with a loading dock, by the way, that gate should not come open unless it's been authorized. In fact, you should have your vehicle drive into a holding area, the gate closed behind the vehicle, then you verify the person's supposed to be there, and then you open the internal gate, and then you don't allow any equipment to leave the building without authorization. But again, if you have poor procedures, people won't know because a illegal entry very often has many distractions. Now, the one thing that never came up in the conversation as we had to get the FBI involved to solve this particular problem was, how did they know where the equipment was? See, they went straight to very expensive equipment, extracted it. It was probably sold on a gray market in hours. But how did they know where that equipment was located? So there had to have been some kind of insider. There had to have been a previous entry attempt. I wasn't on the solution for that particular team. We got DNS back up online as we rerouted, as the network was rerouted. But that's the point I'm making, because a lot of times when I talk about social engineering, you folks don't realize how often it actually happens. Now, what I just described was in the news, or at least in trade news, and it was a commonly known event. They never found the equipment, but it happens regularly, and it happens inside of corporate environments and is never reported because it's such an embarrassment to have this kind of breach in physical security. But what's more likely to happen? What's more likely to happen is somebody's going to enter a public space and get photographs of your badges to see what your badge looks like, the format of the badge. And by the way, monitor social media. When people join or leave your company and they have photographs of your badges, you need to immediately report that as a security violation, contact the person and make sure they understand why that is a problem. And ultimately, you may need to change your badge style, or at least change the salts associated with a badge pass. Here's what's more important. So, in the social engineering element, the access to your building is to gather documents, to gather key fobs, to gather information about how your environment functions. They can grab manuals, they can grab stuff off people's desks. So you want to make sure that those sensitive documents are not readily available. Now, there's a lot of credible, there's a lot of useful information in the brains of your employees and in your customers. Very often monitoring that entry and exit, like I said, the doorman knows the comings and goings of all people in the building, gives somebody who's causing trouble the opportunity to reach out to your staff. Now, again, I'm giving you examples of when I was in sales, when I was on the other side supporting physical security, or working in risk management, or supporting Tempest, for example. Tempest is how a building radiates information like the SSIDs for your Wi-Fi, or has open access points, or has vulnerabilities that could be done with outside equipment. Uh, when I was a salesperson, and those are the safest examples to give you, very often we would watch to see who left the building. We would know who we're looking for, senior level executives, individuals who have information or can make a purchase decision, and we would meet them for lunch. So there's a couple ways that you can extract information in a outside of the building situation that would allow you to gain access to a building, because the best way to gain access to a building is to be invited. So one of the things is you see someone leave, figure out where they go to lunch, and then you carry on a credible conversation. So you might take information from a news release and speak about that as if you were an employee with someone you know to be an employee of an organization and use this small amount of credible information to extract additional details. So you might make a tangential point, such as, hey, I saw a note about layoffs and I'm concerned that my position is going to be going to have problems. What about you? And the other person says, I'm not really that concerned. And you say, well, where do you work? What department do you work in? I work in, and then you give some generic department. Most of the time, you don't actually volunteer any information before the other person provides it. But in a large organization, you can say you work in the mailroom and nobody's going to know. But the underlying factor here is that outside of the building, it is very easy to target individuals who are in the know and find out the details you need to gain physical access. So what does that mean? Well, that means when an employee leaves the building, they need to take their badge off and put it in their purse or in their bag. They need to understand that when they leave the building, to not go to lunch at the same place every day. Very often, companies offer cafeterias or there's within the building food places. You might want to use food delivery. You might want to pack your lunch. If you work in a sensitive environment, understand that when you leave the building, you may want to look like you're off duty or off work. And then if anybody comes and has a conversation with you, just keep it casual. Keep it about non-work related items. I've worked in an environment where I was approached while getting lunch. I was standing in line. They say, "Hey, do you work for such and such a company?" I say, "Well, yes, I do." And they asked me something that was kind of too specific to be a general conversational point. And I simply said, "Hey, I'm out here for lunch. It's been a long day, and I'd rather talk about something different." And then I asked them a question related to the weather or current events. Hey, what do you think about this weather? It's so nice out here. And that was enough to get somebody off topic. Now, it could have been a legitimate conversational starter. I've had conversations that open, hey, I'm new to that company too, and I'd like to get to know different people. What department do you work in? Tell me a little bit about what's going on. If that's inside the building and they're wearing a badge for the same company that you're working in, then it's okay to have that conversation. But that conversation outside could be social engineering. It could be a means to gain access to an environment. Now, again, when you're collecting information as a salesperson, what I'd often do is feign ignorance about a topic. So I'd be at a conference, I'd feign ignorance about a topic. I actually knew a little bit about the topic. I knew exactly who I needed to talk to get more information, but I was enthusiastic about learning more about a particular topic, and that is to get the other person to volunteer information. Those who know things often gain satisfaction sharing things or at least educating you, and that was valuable for me to determine who the decision makers were to send a letter or to call into an office in order to make a pitch for a product or service. Now, I don't market like that anymore. I often will just use data. And that leads me to my last topic. Everything I've discussed here about gaining physical access to an environment to extract information so that you can sell something or you can steal something or you can add something to the environment, like for example, gaining access to an environment to drop a keylogger key fob, that's a real thing. But all of that can happen without physical access to your environment. So now we're talking about cybersecurity. Now, the reason I wanted to talk about social engineering, starting with a physical aspect, is because very often cybersecurity is the only place people look today. They look at, identifying who a decision maker is, sending them an email, such as phishing, to get more information, or spear phishing by going directly to somebody and using any of the things that we described here. These are often the only way you look. But while you're looking at digital access points, individuals who are really such as in corporate espionage, such as competitors, they're actually physically in your environment. Now, there are concepts such as pretexting, which I talked about in the sense of you having some information about a topic and extracting additional information from somebody who has details, or feigning ignorance in a topic with someone who's interested in teaching about a concept. Both of those work. Now, that is something that happens commonly in a social media environment. So, LinkedIn, Facebook, the groups on these different platforms, the career related groups, there are constant, and I see it almost every day. Um, people who have a large number of followers, for example, who are setting up the reason why you might want to volunteer information to them because they could potentially hire you. So all these things, tailgating, for example, happens in social media by having a fake profile. So on LinkedIn, you can set up a fake user and you can have the fake user working at the company, which is the target of what you're doing. And then you have a simple, innocent reaching out. Hey, is so and so still working at your company? And then when the person checks your profile, they see that you're the same company, and they'll usually get an answer. I'm sharing this because I want you to be diligent about physical security and understand that digital elements can compromise even the physical environment. Today, as in selling, you don't have to physically go to a building anymore. Now, to reach very high-end decision makers, you still have to physically go out and meet them. And that's the casual accidental meeting at their favorite lunch spot. That's the casual accidental meeting at the transportation that they use. Maybe they use a particular private car company, or they're always using Uber, or they're always using a certain taxi company. This type of information helps you understand their comings and goings. But today we can actually just buy data. So the groups that you're involved in, the organizations that you are active in. A big scam lately that's happening is inviting people to speak on webinars. So there's no audience, and they invite experts to speak on webinars, and they start asking questions about best practices in physical security, best practices in cybersecurity, best practices in such and such, which gives a profile of what practices are likely to be relevant or familiar to the individual, therefore being active in the environment the individual works for. So, this is a huge topic. If you want to speak specifically about the application of this kind of risk management to improve and protect the physical security of your environment, as well as countermeasures to address this kind of threat, then visit me at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. Go to the contact page. You'll be able to ask your questions. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations, where we do touch on social engineering, the use of psychological influence, and persuasion in order to move forward your career. And in this particular case, whether you're on the selling side or you're on the protection side or the security side, uh, physical security still matters. Someone gains access to your building, they can drop a payload there just as easy as they can by broadcasting to your organization. If you don't have the right cameras, if you don't have the right controls or layers of security, someone will and can cost you millions of dollars in risk and liability. Again, I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations, and I hope this has been useful to you. Keep sending in the questions when you visit www.insidestrategicrelations.com. That's all one word, .com. You can go to the contact page and ask your questions, and these questions have been invaluable for me to deliver relevant and quality resources to help you advance your high income or top professional career. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in the next podcast.